looked at the cover of the audiobook and she said, oh, I was hoping they would say on here to play it at 1.5x. Yeah, it was really funny. So I am going to read. I'm not going to read a lot, but I'm going to start off. Actually, this is probably the only thing I'm going to read, but it gets to the. It gives you a quick overview of what happened, and it will help me to explain why I wrote. On a very cold night of a very cold winter, our 21-year-old son Max walked off an ice-slicked pier onto the surface of Lake Ontario. We, my wife Meg, his sisters Sarah and Elizabeth, and I, presume that he walked until the ice gave way beneath him. We don't know. We will never know. An eyewitness saw him get out of his car, an 11-year-old SUV that once had belonged to his beloved grandfather, and walk onto the pier. Law enforcement eventually spotted some of Max's belongings near the end of the pier on the solid surface of the lake. And 8 weeks later, the 4th week of spring, according to the calendar, Lake Ontario surrendered his body. It would not be much of a whodunit. Those are the facts that we know. He left no note. Max wasn't much on communicating. I keep trying to catch his eye as about the death of my son Max, the grief that engulfed our family, and how I learned to coexist with that grief. I will not be so presumptuous as to include here how my wife and our 2 daughters have dealt with their grief. That consideration is pretty rich, given that what I do for a living as a journalist is become presumptuous enough to write a story and explain someone I hardly know. But, and this will not be the first time that this appears in these pages, little is more personal than grief. All grief is personal, and all grief is as individual as the person doing the grieving. Love is personal too, and there is certainly no shortage of writing about love. As I wrote, I began to understand that grief, if you get past the awkward social construct that American culture has with death, is the purest expression of love for someone who is no longer here to express it back. We mourn the deepest for those whom we love the most. We view grief warily, as an alien force that invades us when we are at our most vulnerable. I'm not going to pretend that I didn't suffer greatly when Max died. I'm not going to tell you that I didn't ache, or that I no longer feel a void. But as I learned how to go on with my life, as I wrestled with and tried to make sense of my pain, I began to see the direct correlation between the love I had for the son I lost and the depth of my pain, my grief. Grief is love. Grief is love. I didn't come to that realization quickly, and I will try to explain how I came to it, but it really helped me because nobody's a big word. I would venture to say, I would put me and my inability to deal with grief or to comfort the grieving against anybody's. I was terrible at it. I was scared of it. Max died when I was 55, and I had made it to that point in my life, avoiding pain at all costs. And I'm still pretty good at avoiding pain, but I have learned that there are some things you can't avoid. And the realization that this was not something I could, stiff arm or that I could run away from, made me understand I had to get used to it. And there were a couple of things that happened that helped me to get to that realization. One was a poem that somebody, come on in. One was a poem somebody suggested I read by a man named Edward Hirsch, who is a Wall Street guy, and he lost a son, a little bit older than Max was. And he had an image, and I'm not going to read the exact poem, but the name of the book is the name of the poem, and it's a 78-page volume of 3-line stanzas. That's the structure of the poem. It's called Gabriel, which is his son's name. And in it, he equated grief to carrying a bag of cement up a hill that never ends, which is a beautiful image. You know, as images of grief go, and it really resonated with me, and it made me understand that this was not something I was going to evade. Once I began to get that and figure out, okay, it's just going to be right here, and I've got to figure out how to carry it, then I just sort of began to relax a little bit. And the other thing that helped me, a neighbor whose husband had died suddenly said to me, and I think she got it from a greeting card, I don't know, is grief is like standing at the shore, and sometimes the wave washes over your ankles, and sometimes it washes over your head. In both cases, it goes back out. And what I began to realize as time began to work its magic healing powers is that you catch yourself having a few good minutes, and then you catch yourself having an hour, and then you catch yourself having a good day, and then when you feel really badly, as it will come back, you understand it's just lean into it, it will recede. And that was really helpful. And we still have, you know, Max died 7 years ago in 10 days, 12 days, 12 days. And February 22nd is a hard day every year. But, you know, well, I won't speak for Meg, but or our girls, but and that was a really, just as a side point, going from the 5 of us to the saying the 5 of us will, or the 4 of us will, or instead of saying the kids, saying the girls. That was really hard. You know, that was for a while was a real slap, but you know, that's what it is. So, you know, we all try to stay together. We all try to be together on February 22nd. Our girls live in San Francisco, and we try to get out there. You know, we won't be out there this year. COVID has kind of screwed things up in that regard, but you know, we just try to be together, and both on Max's birthday and on February 22nd, we try to stick to a Max diet, which was brown, pretty much. Max, you know, he was big on meat and French fries and cereal and bread. He was well. I'll get to Max in a minute, but we do try to eat the biggest, you know, grossest hamburger we can eat on that day. You know, the best way I know how to communicate is by writing, and that's what I've done for a living. And it's, you know, I'm much better getting my thoughts down like this than I am speaking. This helped me grieve tremendously, and you know, I began within days of Max disappearing, just pouring out what was in my head and my heart into my laptop, and it began, you know, over the course of the first 18 months, I was writing 4 or 5 mornings a week. I would usually do it before dawn because I wasn't sleeping very well. And it might be 500 words, it might be 1,500 words, it might be a paragraph, but I would just whatever, you know, was sort of a, and I didn't go back and read it until I decided to try to put the book together. But that's how I excavated my grief. And you learn you have to get the grief out of you. Because if you don't control how it comes out of you, it will control how it comes out of you, because it's going to come out of you. So if you don't take proactive steps, if you try to tamp it down or hold it back, you know, it will come out, and it may not be at a really good time for you. And, you know, as I said in what I read, Meg and I, and and said to our girls, don't care how you grieve, you got to do something. They did it very differently, as Meg and I did. You know, one of them went, you know, straight to a grief counselor. The other one found somebody she could talk to, and, you know, was a friend, and they did it. You know, and that was very beneficial for them. And my point about writing into my laptop is that I didn't decide to write this book until a couple of years ago, and it was actually before the pandemic. The pandemic was just timed really well for me to get it done. Wasn't a lot of sports events 2 years ago, if you recall. And I had that as just sort of not so much a template, but this is where my head was. This is what I was thinking. And I did, you know, the best way to me to explain why I decided to write the book is, in a way, is to tell you why the reasons that had nothing to do with the decision. I didn't want it to be a cathartic book. You know, people have asked me, did you write this book for catharsis? And to me, catharsis is, okay, you know, you pay me $28 and I vomit in your lap for 250 pages. You know, I think that's a real imposition on the reader. I didn't write it for therapy. I felt like I needed to figure all that out before I sat down to write. And again, if you write it for therapy, you're writing for yourself. I didn't write it to tell everybody who Max was. And that's a part of it, obviously. But again, I think that's really written for the parent to say, don't forget my kid, you know, and that's a part of it. But the motivation for me was, as I said, I was so bad at grief, and I was so bad at comforting people that once I went through it, the word I kept coming up with was docent. You know, if I could just explain to people what it's like on that side of the fence, then maybe if/when it happens to them, and not in the manner of losing a child, but if you live long enough, you have to deal with grief. I mean, that's just the way things work. You know, when it happens to you, or when it happens to somebody you are friends with or love, you'll know maybe I can help them handle it better. You know, I said a minute ago I was bad at it. My father died in 2014, so it was, Max died in 2015. I do this all the time. I get them. He died in 2007, so it was 7.5 years before Max died. And I just basically denied he was dying, you know, to myself. And which did myself a disservice, you know, rather than acknowledge it and try to, you know, talk to him about it and talk about his life with him. I just, well, you know, maybe he'll get better, you know, because everybody with stage 4 cancer gets better, right? And the real disservice I did was to our children, because I just didn't want to deal with it, didn't know how to deal with it, didn't want them to hurt, so I didn't prepare them that he was dying. So I had that, you know, I didn't know how to do it, and the way I handled it with anybody that was grieving was, I think, what a lot of people do, which is you say one thing to the person, and you check that box in your mind, and then you don't bring it up again. And and I would say, well, I said something, but I don't want to keep bringing it up. And people would say to me, and once I've got on the other side of the equation, then people would say to me, well, I didn't want to bring it up. And I would look at them and I would smile so they would know that I was not trying to be a jerk. But I would say, well, yeah, if you hadn't have brought him up, I wouldn't have been thinking about him. And that's probably a little snarky, but the point is, and what I learned, and it's still valid 7 years later, I love it when people ask me about Max. It keeps him around. It keeps him present. And one thing you figure out is when someone dies, the experiences you have with them end, obviously, and that you have a finite number of experiences. You have a finite number of photographs of them. Everything is now in one bowl. So if somebody can come up to me and talk about Max and tell me a story about him that I didn't know, what a gift. It's terrific. And we had a party for Max the night the book was published. And his fourth grade teacher came because we really liked her. I think she taught 2 of our 3. And she just started telling me a story of Max and the colonial play. We live in New England, so 4th grade you have a colonial play. And shy, sweet, withdrawn Max pulls Patrick Henry out of the hat, and so he's Patrick Henry. And she said he just pounded the table. He's going, "Give me liberty or give me death." She said, and the whole room just kind of went, whoa. They hadn't seen that out of Max, and it changed everybody's view of him, as well as hers. And what a great story to hear. And if she had told me that, and maybe she did tell me in 4th grade, but like everything else, oh, that's nice, and I would have gone back to cover whatever game I was going to cover. So that's the dirty secret of grieving parents is that we want to talk about them, and it keeps them present. And even though I said I didn't write this to tell you about Max, so let me tell you a little bit about Max. He was the middle child, our only son. He was diagnosed as a toddler as being somewhere on the spectrum, which was about as exact a diagnosis as we ever got. They could tell us a lot, as is the case in that science. They could tell us a lot of what he didn't have. He wasn't autistic. He didn't have what they used to call Asperger's, and I don't know what they call it now. He just was somewhere on the spectrum. And what did that mean? Well, as with most of those children, he had trouble connecting to his peers. He had trouble reading social cues. He could be obsessive about what he wanted to be knowledgeable about. But it was never a behavioral problem. He had a great relationship with his sisters. He was, of the 3 kids, our most dependable kid for doing what he was supposed to do. He was a rule follower, almost obsessively. And he was proof that God has a sense of humor because he didn't care about sports at all. So, and I'd, like every other, red-blooded American dad, just assumed that my kid would, stop at nothing to buy baseball cards every summer day and would obsessively read the sports pages. He got interested in the the NBA because Lego put out an NBA set. He was, he loved Lego, and so we began going to New Jersey Nets games, which was an hour and a half away from where we lived, because Jason Kidd played for the Nets at the time, and he was in the Lego set. So all of a sudden, Max was interested. So we did that for a few years, and the way I tried to build a bridge to Max was, since sports didn't work, was through humor. I had him watching Looney Tunes at an early age, and the Marx Brothers, and as he got a little older and began to understand language, Bob and Ray. We used to listen to Bob and Ray a lot, and he got to where he loved wordplay, and he had a really delightfully dry and sharp sense of humor. As a teenager, he got into photography, and much like his personality and every other aspect of his life, he didn't like taking pictures of people. He didn't like having his picture taken. He loved taking landscape photographs. He loved taking architectural photographs. He would just see shapes, and we have several photos framed in our home. And our pets. He loved taking pictures of our pets, who he was utterly devoted to, much more so than he spent a lot more time doting over them than over us. So this photo, the photo on the book jacket, is a self-portrait. Max was a photography major at RIT in Rochester, New York, and they had an assignment to take a author photo for the book flap of your book on photography. That's the photo Max turned in. And as you may know, if you've ever read a book, that's what it's supposed to look like, right? It's supposed to be your face. This is what Max did, and it's just so Max. This is actually, he is on a pier looking out onto Lake Ontario. That's about a mile west of the pier that he walked out onto the ice. My brother-in-law has a home on the lake, and that's the pier behind the house. So when the sheriff called that night in February of 2015 and explained that we found this truck in this parking lot, I knew right where he was talking about, and I knew exactly what had happened, because there was no reason, there's no good reason that on a 0-degree night with the wind blowing 20 miles an hour, Max would have been over there. What I love about this being the cover of the book is that he's now a published photographer, and I kind of feel like we completed the assignment. It's on a book jacket. Now the title, I keep trying to catch his eye. I apologize for this only being on my phone, but I will show you. This is a photo of our children at our oldest child's college graduation. So this is the summer of 14, 8 months before he died. The girls are looking straight at the camera, and Max is doing there's the camera, and Max is looking up and away. So this is the wallpaper on my phone, and has been for a number of years. And I was just looking at my phone one day about 4 years ago, and I was like, look at me. Come on, Max, look at me. And of course he doesn't. So now let me tell you a couple of things. These are kind of a couple of things that people have asked me about, so I'll go ahead and bring them up. And I said in the part that I read that this is my story. It's not the story of the girls or Meg. And they were incredibly emotionally generous to let me write the book. And us out there again. Going public with the story is something that we had to decide that week Max disappeared. Because if you're a writer at ESPN and your child goes missing, you become a news story, and he becomes a news story. And we had to decide right then how we were going to handle it. And as a journalist, the last thing I was going to do is say no comment, just because professionally I didn't want to do that. And the other thing was, I didn't want anything I did or any way I responded to be interpreted as if I was ashamed of Max. And if your son presumably ends his life, which it's all coincidental. It's just where those are the dots you connect. I didn't want our silence about it, if we were going to be silent, to be interpreted as shame. I just didn't. We weren't ashamed of him, and so we decided early on we were going to be public. For one thing, it makes it a lot easier to go public, because if you don't go public and you only tell X number of people, then all of a sudden you are a gatekeeper, and you're in the CIA and you're deciding who gets security clearance. Oh, you're a second cousin. Okay, we're going to tell you this and this, but we're not going to tell you this. And especially early on, you got there's so much going through your brain and so many things that are happening. Just didn't want to go there. It was just easier, and I kind of felt like if it makes you uncomfortable that our son ended his life, or if you attach stigma to that, that's not my problem. And again, I have way bigger problems than that, and so even to this day, when people say to me, how many children do you have? I say 3. And the difference is just I don't answer chronologically anymore the way I did for 21 years. Elizabeth was 17 for 17 years. You say the girls, and then I say our son died 7 years ago. He was 21, and we lost him. But it's enormously freeing to do that. And the other part of it is, the bottom line is that mental illness needs sunlight. And, I think everybody focuses on the first word of that phrase, when really the focus should be on the second. It's an illness. And okay, yeah, it's in the brain, but that, the difference is that it's in the brain instead of the heart. It's just harder to diagnose and harder to deal with. And if you think about it, certainly my parents' generation, nobody talked about cancer. And if you talked about cancer, you sort of did it quietly, and sometimes you didn't even tell the person who had it that they had cancer. And then we brought cancer out into the open, and over the course of my lifetime, all of our lifetimes, the progress that's been made against cancer has been incredible. So, what if we did that with mental illness? And trust me, I'm not an expert on mental illness. I'm an expert in one case of mental illness that went off the rails. But I kind of figured that out. I had the great gift of, I grew up with a woman who was on the faculty at Duke University School of Medicine, Robin Gurwitch, and our mothers were best friends for years, and I hadn't talked to Robin for 30 years. And then the week Max died, she called me, and she talked to me for 90 minutes. And she said the 2 things that stuck with me that night and continue to stick with me is that unless someone tells you, at this hour, at this day, at this location, I'm going to end my life. You can't stop them. And the second thing she said that stuck with me is that you will never understand why he did this because you think rationally. And at the end, he was not thinking rationally. And I am not so unself-aware as to think that, maybe that's just a get out of jail free card I got, so that I don't perseverate on my guilt. But I believed her, and I think she's right. And I think it saved a lot of wear and tear on me. And, and I kept thinking, I kind of decided right off, what difference does it make? If I figured out why he did it, does that mean he gets to come back? No. So why am I going to waste my energy on figuring that out? My wife was very different in that regard. She had to have every question answered, and in my very graceful and supportive way, I would say to her, "So how hot was the stove today when you put your hand on it?" But we both understood, and look, when you're a Jew from Alabama and you marry a Catholic from Syracuse, you figure out how to accommodate each other years ago. So we made plenty of room for how we did things a long time ago, and that helped a lot, because as I said at the outset, you grieve differently. And we are, oddly enough, our marriage is probably stronger now. I do have to tell you one story about that. Our oldest flew from San Francisco to Rochester after Max disappeared, and she gets off the red eye, and she is a really smart person, and she reads everything. This is 3 days after Max, 4 days after Max died. We don't know where he is. Police, the scuba boats are in 38-degree water, which they were there for 3 weeks. And she's about 10 feet outside of security, and she looks at us and she said, "Hey, I read that 50% of parents who lose a child get a divorce. Are you guys getting a divorce?" And I looked at her and said, "Let's do one disaster at a time." Okay? And then I said, "No, honey, we're going to be fine." So we did do it differently. We continue to do it differently, but we're okay with that, and we don't judge each other. There's a guy named it's in the book. The leading guy on grief right now, and I apologize because I can't remember his name, which, at 3 a.m. when I remember it, if you leave me your number, I'll call you and tell you what it is. But his point is, it's not the death of the child per se that causes marriages to fray, it's the judging of one another's grief. And that we didn't do that, whether by luck or, as I said, just that we were used to accommodating one another. And that, we're at a place now where, it still hurts and you still carry it, but you figure out you can't stay back where he was. As much as I really didn't want to get out of that fetal position, your life is going to go on, and you have to decide, are you going to try to stay back where at that moment? And if you do that, you're going to miss things that are going to continue to come. And I kind of figured out, 2 weeks after we recovered his body, our nephew got married in Mobile, and my hometown, and we had to decide where we're going to go to the wedding. And I thought, well, if we don't go, then we lose again. And we didn't want to go. We didn't want to be there, really. But am I going to deny myself joy because my son died, and he's still going to be dead whether I have that joy or not, so why not have the joy? And that's, you know, you carry the grief and you carry of him what you can, and you have to keep going. And I think that's, you know, that's what has sustained me. So thank you. Be happy to answer any questions. You know, I can always stay here until my flight's Friday morning.
I have a question.
Sure.
I only caught the last 10 to 12 minutes, 15 minutes maybe of the interview you did with on K-Fan the other day, and so I kind of jumped into the middle of it, and so I didn't quite get the full context of it. And if it doesn't bother you to talk about it again, you talked something about a letter that he wrote.
Yes.
When he was 14 or something, and I didn't quite grasp the whole message of that part of the conversation.
Well, let's see if I don't have it marked in the book, but I'll tell you as this is it. We, as I think a lot of families do, have a folder, you know, we have a file cabinet, you know, folder with the kids. And I'm going through the folder as I started to put the book together. And I found this letter Max had written me when he was 14. And for Father's Day, I think Meg had asked kids to write me a letter on Father's Day. And, well, I'll read you the letter. Dad, I'm never good at these sorts of things. It's not in my nature to be sappy at this age. Maybe it comes later when I'm an adult. But since I know it will make you happy, I'll do the best I can. So here goes. Now I have to warn you, not warn you, but on the envelope of the letter he wrote, "Mom, do not read this. I am serious." She didn't read it until I found it last year. Nearly 7 years ago, in other words, just under half of my life ago, I barely got to have what would be called quality time with you. Oh, there were those board game nights we had, but for a while it seemed that you and I hardly had time to ourselves together. That's why I'm glad those Nets games came around. It's during those car rides to and from, and during the game itself, that I think I got to know you, not parent or worker you. We bonded over Jack Benny, old time radio, Bob and Ray, and Suspense, an all old radio shows we listened to on satellite radio. And I found a side of you that I barely knew existed. And this was further amplified during the trips to San Diego and Washington, D.C. Being in your company for those trips furthered the experience of the vacations, and I think it is times like these that I cannot find fault with you at all. The atmosphere of those times makes it impossible. I only regret that we cannot have that atmosphere more. And I know all too well that that atmosphere can't always exist. I'd be naive to think it could. I feel bad about it. I feel bad during the fallings out we sometimes have because I know you're thinking in the long run, and sometimes I can't see that far ahead. I wish I could, though. Life would be much better that way. So I guess I'll wrap it up here with a few simple words. Thank you for everything. Your son, Max. So I think I did what, well, I won't speak for most dads, but I read the letter when he gave it to me, and I went, oh, that's really nice. And I threw it in the file, and it just, went right over my head. And, and to read it now, obviously, the perspective it gives you is, I screwed up. And of course you screw up with every child, but with the girls I can still try to make amends. And with him, that's, I can't. And that, oh well, I mean, nothing I can do about it now, but it's, beautiful letter, and for 14 years old, it's remarkably mature and big words.
Can you comment? I listened to that interview as well, but I was struck by the number of people that called in and were just sitting in their car and listening, and they have similar stories or they don't. Well, as you've written this book and talked to people, what is it about this story that's resonating with people that may or may not have similar experiences? I mean, is it just your willingness to talk about it? Is it the message? What is it?
Well, I think it's a really good question. I think socially we don't talk about death, which is the one thing we're all guaranteed to do. And I don't know why we don't. Part of that may just be that I'm in my 60s now, and I'm more cognizant of it. I don't know. I mean, my mother's still alive, but I just having decided I was going to be open about it, and I think I'm saying things that a lot of people feel, but either don't know how or don't have the microphone, or they're afraid of. It's going to make somebody else, that other people wouldn't be able to handle it, or make somebody else uncomfortable, I guess. I don't know, but I think the community of parents of suicide victims, a lot of them have reached out to me, and a lot of them reached out to me in the days and months after Max died. And so now when I get a phone call about somebody in our town or somebody I know, I try to pay it forward, because all kind of people reached out to me, famous and not famous, and I think if you talk about it rationally and explain it the way that I have learned to cope with it, then it strikes a chord with people.
I have one other question.
Sure.
As you said, you don't know why or anything, no note or anything, but is there anything about his mental health issues that, in retrospect, you felt we should have done something different, or in any respect that you look at in retrospect and go, signs we didn't see, things like that, or that medication he could have been on, or whatever the case may be?
Well, I mean, of course you second guess a lot of things. He was taking an antidepressant. He was in therapy. He was in therapy on campus. The mental health center on campus, we did sit down and talk to them 3 years after Max died, which was after the statute of limitations had expired on if we had wanted to be litigious, which we didn't, and wasn't going to bring him back. And they basically what they said to us, what we think happened is the dosage of his antidepressant was making his hands shake, which is not an uncommon symptom. He was a photographer. So he went to them and said, is there something we can do? What can I do about this? And they gave him a medication to control the tremor. There is some evidence, and it's happened with some people. If you ask Dr. Google, that the two medications don't mix well. Do we know that's what happened? No, but that's out there. The therapists at RIT, and I write this in the book, say that sometimes they are caught between the student is now an adult, and what what they can tell us as parents, and whether they sign a release or not, they're trying to establish trust with the kid. So when are they going to run to the parent? There is a protocol of how you deal with suicidal ideation. When Max said to them he was having thoughts, he also said he was still making plans. He was talking about things he was going to do a week, 2 weeks down the road. He joined an online dating service 2 or 3 days before he died. So again, he was just kind of all over the place. And so it's just a gray, it's mental health, it's a gray area. And, yeah, there's things I wish we had done differently. There's things I wish the doctors had done differently. But it's, in some ways it's still sort of a crapshoot.
How has this affected your relationship with your daughters?
It's a good question. In general, I'm a more empathetic person, and I'm a more patient person, and plus they're grown-ups now, although, as my older brother said to me, they never go off scholarship, right? I try to check in on them a little more, with a little more intent than I used to. Now, our older daughter, she lets you know what's going through her head. And she's emotionally, her EQ is off the charts. The younger daughter is very private, and everything with Elizabeth is on a need-to-know basis. But we know she's processing. We've discussed it. We know who she talks to, and we're good with that. And, she's just private. So I don't know I haven't calibrated how much it's changed because of this, and how much it's just changed because they are adults now. I think we are closer because only the four of us understand it, in a way that others don't. But I'll have to think about that a little more. An interesting question.
What were some things that people did or said that helped you process your grief?
So, thank you for asking that. I should have covered that. There's a book that came out shortly after Max died, called Option B. And in it, they discuss how to deal with grief. And a lot of this is borrowed from that. But don't say, if there's anything I can do, call me. Because again, as I said earlier, about security clearance, now I got to be an appointment. Now I got to keep an appointment of who's going to, do what. Just go shovel their driveway. Bring them dinner. I'm coming over. I'm at the grocery store. I'm bringing you a chicken. I heard a noise outside my bathroom window, second floor bathroom window one morning. I looked down and two of my neighbors were shoveling my driveway. So I opened the window and leaned out and said, "Get off my property." I needed to laugh, and then I went down and helped them shovel. But just don't be afraid to do. And the other thing you learn is don't ask, how are you? You know, how are you today? How is your day going? You know, because you live in these, as I said, you're hoping for a good 10 minutes. You know, how are you doing right this minute? And it's also, and I think especially with men, you know, we try to fix. You know, we don't just listen. We try to fix it. And you know, you can't fix this. And I finally had to tell my brother that one day. You know, we're not going to fix this. You know, this is, I know what you're trying to do, and I appreciate it, but we're not going to fix this. And then he understood. It's just listening. You know, and all four of us had people that just listened. They were different people. You know, but we all had them, and they are, you know, God, just what a gift that was. So, and it's hard to listen to. It can be hard to listen to, you know. But it was really nice of them. I say up here, I say shovel snow, and when I speak in the South, I would say rake pine straws. Yes?
More men die by suicide than women, and I'm wondering, as the father of a young man who died that way, is there anything that strikes you as far as helping boys and men who are depressed or may not even know what depression is or what it feels like or what might help? Is there anything uniquely to boys and men, to males in our society that we should think about or offer?
I don't know if it's strictly male versus female. I think, you know, growing up where I grew up and growing up in the generation I grew up in, you got to be tough. You know, John Wayne. You know, and you weren't supposed to access those emotions. You know, and I was so good at packing them away that when I needed to access them, you know, it was just you know, there was a lot of stuff on top of them. I don't, you know, I think it's encouraging young boys that it's okay to ask for help. That it's not, you know, strength is not tough it out. Strength is asking for help, is admitting vulnerability. And that's I think boys have enough issues in being vulnerable at that age among their peers, but you know, that's what is good mental health and will, I think, bode them well for a long time. But there's a lot of forces fighting against that in culture and in society. You know, what I said about mental health being open, I think the fact that so many world-class athletes are now broaching that and breaking through that barrier has got to be helpful in that regard. You know, Simone Biles reaching out to Michaela Schifrin the other day, you know, was really sweet. And you know, Kevin Love, of course, and there's any number of male and female athletes that have done that, and hopefully that will become more of the norm. Yes?
Just a comment, and then a question too. I think just in terms of, I have two boys, and it's interesting, the older one talks less than the younger one. And this day and age with social media and their phones, and you know, when we were younger, right, we talked on the phones, and it's interesting, it's just in terms of the dynamic of mental health, in terms of boys potentially, in terms of being more isolated, right? Learning how to express feelings or have conversations. So right now, like in the morning with our two boys, we watch the NFL Network in preparation for the Super Bowl. And one ad that just keeps going and going is the conversation of people that are trying to say something but don't know how to say it. And it's about mental health. You know, they're standing there awkwardly. And I told her one son, I said, you know what? this is really good that they replay this every 5 minutes, because it's like working out or reading your French. It takes repetition for it to become more comfortable to have these conversations or strike a conversation. So if you notice that, I'm not sure, you should check it out on NFL Network.
Oh, well, thank you.
You had said that you're Jewish, your mother
Yeah.
or your wife's
I'm
Catholic?
Jewish, yeah.
That's kind of how I'm Catholic, wife's Jewish. So talk a little bit about how you both leaned on your faith, dive more in if you did, in terms of dealing with death, because as a Catholic, how I view death, I think is a little bit different than how my wife views death. So, you know, obviously you talked about give and take and compromise has been critical in your relationship.
Yes.
Did faith and leaning on any pillars?
How old are your boys?
13 and 14.
Okay. I was just curious. I didn't lean. I mean, I
Or perspective.
yeah. Perspective is, you know, my wife, I would say, is a lapsed Catholic, if that, and our rabbi in my town in Connecticut said to us one time, you know, we're all going the same place, we're just on different buses. I thought it was really good. Her last name is Murray, and he said he introduced her once as Muldoon, and she said Murray. He said Muldoon, Murray, Goldberg, Greenberg. I think, and I don't know this, but I think I haven't really, and I haven't asked her this, I think her determination to learn as much as she could, part of it was definitely maternal, but I think part of it had to do with her faith, or at least what she grew up in. She doesn't go, she's not a practicing Catholic, so I don't know that helped her. I think my faith helped me just in the readings I did, and the comfort of some of the rituals in Judaism. You know, a yahrzeit candle, you know, that you light on the anniversary of a death, and Yizkor services that are held on big Jewish holidays, and the readings in those times I would go back to. But in terms of an overall global view of death, I'm not enough. I don't know Judaism deeply enough to be able to give you a cogent answer.